begin with a question that might unsettle you. What happens when the most powerful office in the world makes a decision without foresight, without strategy, and without an understanding of the consequences? That is precisely what we are witnessing today. President Trump has just made a mistake so significant, so reckless, that few are truly prepared for the cascading effects it will unleash, not only on America, but on the fragile balance of global politics. President Trump's critical miscalculation is not simply another entry in the long list of controversies that have defined his political career. It is something far more consequential, a blunder with implications that extend beyond partisan divides and domestic skirmishes. What makes this mistake so dangerous is not only the policy itself, but the mindset behind it, a reckless disregard for foresight, for measured strategy, and for the lessons of history. We must ask ourselves, how often can the world absorb the shocks of ill-conceived decisions by a superpower before the system begins to crack? This question is no longer theoretical. It is unfolding before our very eyes. The essence of leadership is the ability to anticipate consequences. Great leaders study history, listen to advisors, weigh risks, and prepare for outcomes that may not be immediately visible. In this case, Trump has once again substituted strategy with spectacle. His decision, framed as a demonstration of strength, is in reality a profound miscalculation that exposes the United States to risks it cannot afford. By prioritizing headlines over substance, bravado over strategy, he has chosen a path that weakens rather than strengthens America's global standing. And here lies the uncomfortable truth: when the United States falters, the world feels it. Think for a moment about the architecture of global stability. It rests on certain assumptions that America, while imperfect, acts with a degree of predictability, that it weighs its choices carefully, and that it recognizes its responsibilities as the world's most powerful nation. Trump's action shatters those assumptions. Suddenly, allies question the reliability of U.S. commitments, adversaries sense an opening, and international institutions struggle to maintain coherence in the face of erratic American behavior. The ripple effects of such a misstep are profound, for once the perception of American steadiness is lost, the very foundations of global cooperation begin to erode. This mistake is not isolated. It is symptomatic of a broader patterns, the conflation of domestic political theater with global strategy. Trump, ever the showman, has treated foreign policy as if it were an extension of campaign rallies, seeking applause lines instead of long-term stability. But the world is not an arena for performance politics. When decisions are made on impulse without calculation, the consequences are paid in fractured alliances, lost economic opportunities, and in some cases, needless conflict. The real tragedy is that these costs are not borne by the architects of the mistakes, but by ordinary citizens who see jobs, lost prices rise, and security diminished. Consider also the psychological impact of this blunder. Nations across the globe are constantly reading signals from Washington, adjusting their policies based on what they perceive to be America's direction. A sudden, reckless move is not just a tactical error, it is a signal, a declaration that the U.S. is no longer guided by strategy, but by whim. This breeds uncertainty, and in international relations, uncertainty is dangerous. It prompts nations to hedge, to reorient toward other powers, to invest in alternative partnerships that dilute America's influence. Every rash decision, therefore,
Mm.
does not just harm America in the present, it accelerates the long-term decline of U.S. leadership. History offers us sobering reminders. Great powers rarely fall in a single dramatic collapse. They decline slowly through a series of mistakes, miscalculations, and squandered opportunities. Trump's critical error today may well be remembered as one of those pivotal moments, a decision that signaled the weakening of American leadership, not because the U.S. lacked power, but because it lacked wisdom. And wisdom is the true currency of leadership. Without it, even the most powerful nations can find themselves adrift. The hook here, the lesson that should command our attention, is that this was avoidable. The United States did not have to walk into this trap of its own making. There were other paths available, paths rooted in diplomacy, consultation, and prudence. But instead, the choice was made to elevate short-term gain over long-term stability. And once such a precedent is set, it becomes harder to reverse, harder to convince the world that the United States can again be trusted to act with restraint and foresight. We must therefore treat this miscalculation with the seriousness it deserves. It is not another passing storm in Washington's political theater. It is a turning point, a warning flare that tells us the guardrails of strategy have been abandoned. And unless those guardrails are restored, this mistake will not stand alone. It will be followed by others, each more costly, each more destabilizing, until the world wakes up to a new reality where America's role as a global anchor is no longer taken for granted. America's global credibility has always been its most valuable asset. It is not simply the size of the economy, nor the might of the military that has given the United States influence across continents. It is the perception, built carefully over decades, that America could be trusted to stand by its commitments, to provide stability when others faltered, and to lead when the stakes were high. That credibility was earned slowly, painfully, through wars fought, treaties negotiated, and international institutions shaped. But credibility, unlike material power, is fragile. It can vanish quickly when trust is broken, or and rebuilding it often takes generations. President Trump's most recent miscalculation strikes at the heart of that credibility, sending a message to allies and adversaries alike that the United States may no longer be the reliable partner it once was. The importance of credibility in global politics cannot be overstated. Nations act not only on the basis of capabilities, but also on the belief that promises will be honored, that commitments are more than words on paper. The NATO alliance, for instance, is not just a military arrangement. It is a bond of trust that each member will come to the defense of the other. International trade agreements are not merely about tariffs and quotas. They are assurances that rules will be respected. If that trust erodes, the entire system begins to fray. And here is the hook. Once allies begin to doubt America's word, they do not simply wait patiently for Washington to correct course. They seek alternatives. They hedge their bets with new partnerships. They strengthen ties with other powers, and slowly the gravitational pull of U.S. leadership weakens. We are already seeing signs of this shift. European leaders, once willing to follow Washington's lead, are openly questioning whether the United States can be relied upon. They are speaking more frequently of strategic autonomy, building defense and trade frameworks that do not depend on American approval. In Asia, where the US once anchored stability, nations are recalibrating their diplomacy, turning to China not because they prefer Beijing's leadership, but because they cannot afford to place all their trust in an America that seems increasingly erratic. Latin American nations, long accustomed to Washington's dominance, are diversifying their partnerships, accepting Chinese investments and Russian arms deals, not out of ideological affinity, but out of pragmatic necessity. The erosion of credibility is not a theoretical concern. It is a reality unfolding day by day. What makes this moment so dangerous is that credibility, once lost, is far harder to regain than it was to build in the first place. A nation can deploy more troops, spend more money, or pass more policies, but none of that matters if other nations believe that its word cannot be trusted. Trust is the invisible glue of the international system. It cannot be measured in statistics or accounted for in budgets, but its absence is felt in every negotiation, every treaty, every summit. Or when foreign ministers sit across from American officials now, they do not only hear the words being spoken, they weigh them against a growing perception that America under Trump has become impulsive, self-interested, and unreliable. And once that perception hardens, no speech, no promise, no handshake can erase it overnight. History offers sobering lessons here as well. The British Empire, once dominant, lost credibility through repeated overreach and betrayal of partners, and its influence declined rapidly even before its military strength waned. The Soviet Union collapsed not only because of economic weakness, but because its system no longer commanded respect or belief. Credibility is the true backbone of power, and without it, even the strongest nations can find themselves isolated. Trump's mistake may seem in the moment like another headline, but in reality, it chips away at the very foundation of U.S. influence. The hook, the stark warning is this: when the world begins to look elsewhere for leadership, it is nearly impossible to reverse that tide. For decades, America was the nation others turned to in times of uncertainty. Today, Trump's actions suggest that the U.S. is itself a source of uncertainty. This reversal is not just embarrassing, it is destabilizing. And once destabilization begins, it rarely remains contained. The credibility deficit Trump has created will invite challenges from adversaries who sense opportunity, create hesitation among allies who once stood shoulder to shoulder with Washington, and embolden competitors who are eager to present themselves as alternatives. That is how global orders shift, not in a single dramatic event, but through a steady accumulation of doubts, disappointments, and disillusionments. History is full of cautionary tales about what happens when great powers allow arrogance and short-sightedness to cloud their judgment. And it is impossible to ignore the parallels today, from Vietnam to Iraq to the financial crisis of 2008. The pattern has been consistent. Leaders mistake power for wisdom, overestimate their ability to control outcomes, and underestimate the costs of failure. The tragedy is that when these mistakes are made, it is never the powerful architects of policy who bear the brunt of the consequences. It is ordinary citizens, workers, families, and communities who suffer. President Trump's most recent blunder fits squarely into this long line of costly miscalculations. And it reminds us that history does not repeat itself by accident. It repeats itself when leaders refuse to learn. Consider Vietnam, where hubris led American leaders to believe that overwhelming military strength would guarantee victory. They ignored local dynamics, dismissed diplomatic alternatives, and doubled down even as the costs escalated. The result was not only a devastating war abroad, but also a crisis of confidence at home, one that eroded trust in government and divided the nation for generations. Fast forward to Iraq, where the belief in quick victory and easy nation building led to catastrophic consequences, thousands of lives lost, trillions of dollars spent, and a region destabilized for decades. These were not inevitable outcomes. They were the direct result of decisions made in Washington by leaders who believed that power exempted them from the lessons of history. Trump's mistake belongs in this tradition of hubris. He has acted not with caution, but with bravado, assuming that America's sheer power can shield it from repercussions. But history tells us otherwise. The cost of arrogance is always higher than anticipated, and the damage always extends far beyond the initial misstep. What makes this moment especially dangerous is that the world is already on edge. Global markets are fragile, geopolitical rivalries are intensifying, and trust in institutions is waning. Against this backdrop, a reckless decision by the U.S. does not just create a minor disruption, it risks igniting a chain reaction that could destabilize entire regions. The hook that should seize our attention is this: history's great mistakes were never recognized as such in the moment. Leaders convinced themselves they were acting decisively, that their critics were weak or naive, that they alone understood the stakes. Only later, when the costs became undeniable, did the truth emerge. In Vietnam, it took years of mounting casualties before the nation reckoned with reality. In Iraq, the myth of mission accomplished collapsed as sectarian violence tore the country apart. In 2008, the belief that financial markets could regulate themselves gave way to a global economic meltdown that left millions jobless and homeless. Trump's blunder today may not yet be fully visible, but it follows the same trajectory, an overconfident move whose consequences will become clear only when it is too late to reverse them. What makes this particularly cruel is that the burden will fall not on the decision makers, but on ordinary people. It will be workers who lose their jobs when markets react, families who pay more when trade disruptions ripple through supply chains, soldiers who risk their lives when diplomacy fails, and communities who absorb the human cost of policies made in distant offices. The architects of mistakes often walk away with reputations intact, writing memoirs and giving speeches while the public pays in blood and treasure. This is why vigilance is essential, why we must recognize the signs of miscalculation before the consequences become irreversible. The deeper lesson is that humility must always guide leadership. When leaders are unwilling to listen, when they dismiss criticism as weakness, and when they equate strength with unilateral action, mistakes of this scale become inevitable. Trump's decision reflects precisely this mindset, a refusal to accept limits, to consider alternatives, or to anticipate consequences. And once again, as history has shown, it will not be the powerful who pay the price, but the powerless who cannot afford the fallout. The question that should haunt us is whether we will allow history to repeat itself yet again. Are we prepared to watch another generation pay the costs of arrogance and short-sightedness, or will we finally learn the lesson that has been written in blood and debt too many times before? This is not just about one mistake. It is about breaking the cycle of hubris that has plagued American leadership for decades. That cycle is alive and well today, and Trump's miscalculation is proof that without accountability, the pattern will continue and history's warnings will go unheeded. The ripple effects of Trump's blunder are already visible, and they remind us that in a tightly interconnected world, no decision exists in isolation. The global economy and political system are like a vast web where a single or reckless move can send vibrations across continents, unsettling markets, shaking alliances, and emboldening adversaries. This is precisely what we are witnessing now. Financial markets, those early warning sensors of geopolitical uncertainty, have already begun to show signs of unease. Investors react not only to the immediate policy itself, but to the perception that the United States is drifting toward unpredictability. When capital flees uncertainty, jobs are lost, currencies destabilize, and ordinary families feel the pain in rising prices and shrinking opportunities. The drama of politics may play out in Washington, but the consequences are felt in homes, shops, and factories across the globe. Beyond the markets, alliances, the backbone of global stability, are also being tested. Allies depend on reliability, not improvisation. They base their security strategies on the assumption that the United States will act with consistency and foresight. When that assumption collapses, their choices begin to shift. NATO partners, already strained by years of neglect and insult from Trump, are now openly questioning whether Washington's word can still be relied upon. Defense ministers in Europe are convening not to ask how to align with U.S. policy, but how to prepare for a future where U.S. leadership is uncertain. This subtle but significant change in posture signals a long-term recalibration of global security arrangements. The hook here is simple but stark. Once allies begin planning for a world without dependable American leadership, the very foundations of U.S. influence are weakened in ways that no speech or promise can repair. The repercussions extend to adversaries as well. When America stumbles, others seize opportunity. In Moscow, in Beijing, in Tehran, Trump's miscalculation is being studied not as a mistake, but as an opening. These nations understand that global power is not just about force, it is about timing and perception. If Washington projects weakness or disunity, rivals will move swiftly to expand their influence. We already see China accelerating its diplomatic outreach, signing new trade agreements, and presenting itself as the reliable partner that the U.S. no longer appears to be. Russia, too, thrives in the cracks of Western uncertainty, exploiting every opportunity to undermine alliances and extend its reach. What Trump views as a moment of domestic triumph, another headline, another applause line, is in fact a gift to America's strategic competitors. Consider also the cascading effects in regions already fragile. In the Middle East, where stability depends on a delicate balance of trust and deterrence, sudden shifts in U.S. policy embolden militant groups, unsettle fragile governments, and invite new conflicts. In Asia, where nations are caught between the gravitational pull of China and the promises of America, Trump's recklessness tips the scales, nudging them closer to Beijing. In Latin America and Africa, where economic partnerships are increasingly diverse, nations seize the moment to deepen ties with powers willing to offer consistency. The world does not wait for America to correct its mistakes. It adapts immediately. That is why the costs of blunders are so swift and so profound. What makes this situation even more alarming is the erosion of confidence within the international system itself. Institutions like the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, and the International Monetary Fund are designed to stabilize global interactions, but they rely heavily on the leadership of the United States. When Washington acts erratically, these institutions struggle to fulfill their role, for their very credibility is intertwined with American responsibility. Without a reliable anchor, multilateralism weakens and nations retreat into narrow self-interest. The hook then is unmistakable. Trump's mistake does not just damage one policy, it undermines the entire architecture of global cooperation painstakingly built since the Second World War. And so we arrive at a dangerous paradox. Trump's decision, intended to showcase American strength, has instead revealed American vulnerability. By underestimating the interconnectedness of today's world, he has unleashed forces that weaken markets, fracture alliances, embolden adversaries, and destabilize institutions. These are not abstract outcomes. They are already happening, unfolding before us in headlines and diplomatic maneuvers, in shifting investment flows and new regional alignments. The world does not stand still waiting for Washington to regain its footing. It moves on, and every day of uncertainty deepens the consequences. Trust is the lifeblood of international relations, more valuable than raw power and more enduring than temporary advantage. Nations can wield armies, deploy sanctions, or command financial markets, but without trust, their influence diminishes. For decades, America's greatest strength was not only its economic scale or military reach, but the widespread belief that its commitments meant something. Allies could plan around them, adversaries respected them, and the global system relied on them. Trump's recent miscalculation has accelerated the erosion of that trust, and the consequences may be more damaging than any immediate policy fallout. Once trust begins to fray, it rarely returns intact. It lingers as suspicion, as hesitation, as doubt, and those shadows cast long into the future. Trust is built painstakingly through consistency and reliability. The Marshall Plan, NATO's Article 5 pledge, the Bretton Woods institutions, these were not just policies, they were symbols of America's credibility, assurances that Washington would lead not just for itself, but for the broader good of global stability. Today, however, the world looks at Washington and sees unpredictability, impulsiveness, and an almost theatrical disregard for commitments. In such an environment, even America's closest allies hesitate. They begin to question not only this administration, but whether the United States itself can be trusted in the long run. That hesitation is deadly in diplomacy because it changes how nations calculate risk. When trust declines, cooperation becomes fragile and hesitation hardens into disengagement. The hook that should alarm us all is this: once allies no longer fully trust America, they begin to act as if America might not be there tomorrow. Defense strategies are rewritten, economic deals recalibrated, and diplomatic channels redirected toward other centers of power. In Europe, leaders talk openly about strategic autonomy, not because they want to sever ties with the US, but because they no longer believe those ties can be depended upon. In Asia, allies like Japan and South Korea continue to partner with Washington, but hedge their bets, strengthening regional pacts and even cautiously engaging Beijing. Latin American nations, long accustomed to America's shadow, now entertain investment offers from China and Russia without hesitation, seeing them as reliable alternatives in a world where U.S. Commitments may evaporate overnight. Adversaries, too, read the erosion of trust as an invitation. When America is seen as unreliable, its deterrence weakens. Rivals understand that credibility is the glue that holds alliances together. And once it frays, even the strongest military cannot restore it. Russia exploits these gaps by inserting itself into crises where U.S. resolve is in question. China positions itself as a steady hand, telling nations, we are the partner you can count on, a message that resonates more strongly when Washington undermines its own image of stability. The erosion of trust is thus not a passive loss. It actively strengthens competitors, handing them the moral high ground America once claimed as its own. What makes trust so vital is that it cannot be manufactured on demand. A nation cannot suddenly declare, trust us again after years of inconsistency. It must be earned moment by moment through action and reliability. The danger of Trump's blunder is that it accelerates a perception already forming that America's word is no longer ironclad, that promises today may be broken tomorrow. This perception is insidious because it changes how the world organizes itself. Nations that once leaned on Washington for security or guidance now design their futures with America as only one of many options, not the central anchor. That shift is profound and it is happening quietly but unmistakably. Think of the financial crisis of 2008. It was not just a collapse of banks, it was a collapse of trust in institutions that were supposed to safeguard stability. The damage extended far beyond the immediate losses because people no longer believed in the system. In global politics, the same logic applies. When trust in America erodes, it shakes confidence in the entire international order built around American leadership. And unlike money, trust cannot be printed or borrowed. It must be painstakingly restored, often over generations. The tragedy is that this erosion was not inevitable. It is the result of deliberate choices of prioritizing short-term political spectacle over long-term credibility. Trump may view his decisions as victories in the domestic arena, but internationally, they register as red flags, as evidence that the United States no longer values reliability. The world is taking note, and once the perception solidifies, the costs will be staggering. The hook, the warning is this: the erosion of trust is not a temporary setback, it is a structural shift. If not reversed, it will redefine America's place in the world for decades to come, leaving the nation weaker, more isolated, and less capable of shaping the global future. There are moments in history when silence becomes complicity, when failing to act is itself a choice that shapes the future. Trump's miscalculation has brought us to such a moment. The need for course correction is not abstract or optional, it is urgent. The danger lies not only in the immediate consequences of his decision, but in the precedent it sets. The normalization of recklessness at the highest levels of power, if left unchecked, this approach to leadership will invite even greater mistakes, each compounding the last until the damage becomes irreversible. The responsibility then does not fall on Trump alone. It falls on institutions, on policymakers, on citizens, and on allies who must demand accountability and insist on a return to wisdom, strategy, and cooperation. The hook here is unavoidable. The longer we wait to correct course, the higher the cost of doing so becomes. A course correction begins with recognizing the depth of the mistake. Too often, leaders cling to denial, hoping that time will soften criticism or that public attention will shift elsewhere. But denial is dangerous in a world that reacts instantly. Markets do not wait, rivals do not wait, and allies do not wait. Every day of hesitation amplifies uncertainty, and uncertainty erodes stability. The first step, therefore, is honesty, acknowledging that this was not just another minor misstep, but a significant failure that jeopardizes America's credibility and global leadership. Without that acknowledgement, no genuine correction can begin. The second element of course correction is rebuilding the culture of consultation and strategy. One of the most glaring features of Trump's leadership style is the rejection of expert advice and the sidelining of institutions designed to provide balance and foresight. Foreign policy becomes a stage for improvisation rather than a framework of careful calculation. Reversing this trend requires empowering diplomacy, listening to the expertise of career professionals, and reestablishing processes that weigh consequences before decisions are made. In other words, America must return to the idea that strength comes not from unilateral action, but from wise action, and wisdom is never achieved in isolation. Allies, too, have a role to play in pressing for course correction. It is no longer enough for them to quietly express concern while adjusting their strategies in private. They must be clear that American unpredictability carries costs not only for them, but for the United States itself. A strong message from Europe, from Asia, from Latin America that reliability matters, that commitments must be honored, can help create external pressure that reinforces the internal need for change. This is not about humiliation. It is about preserving a global system that benefits all. America, despite its missteps, remains indispensable, and allies understand this. But indispensability should not be mistaken for immunity from criticism. Sometimes the greatest act of friendship is to demand accountability. Domestically, the course correction requires citizens and institutions to step beyond partisanship. The danger of Trump's error is not limited to one party or ideology. It is systemic. If America becomes comfortable with impulsive leadership, if we accept recklessness as the new normal, then future leaders, regardless of party, will feel emboldened to follow the same path. The checks and balances of democracy exist precisely to prevent this, but they only function if they are activated. Congress, the courts, the media, and civil society must resist the temptation to normalize dangerous behavior, must shine light on mistakes, and insist on accountability. The hook here is stark. Failing to act today means inheriting a political culture where recklessness is rewarded and prudence is ignored. Course correction also means reasserting a vision of leadership rooted in cooperation rather than confrontation. The United States cannot navigate today's challenges: climate change, pandemics, economic inequality, technological disruption through unilateralism. These are global problems requiring global solutions, and leadership in this century will be measured not by dominance, but by the ability to build coalitions. Trump's approach undermines precisely that capacity, alienating partners when cooperation is most urgent. Reversing course means reaffirming America's commitment to shared goals, to the institutions that embody them, and to the values that make alliances more than transactional deals. Above all, urgency must replace complacency. The idea that mistakes can be corrected eventually is itself a dangerous illusion. In international politics, time is not neutral, it compounds risk. Rivals consolidate their advantages, allies drift further away, and citizens lose faith in institutions. By the time leaders recognize the full cost, it is often too late. That is why course correction must begin immediately, not tomorrow, not after the next election cycle, but now. Every delay increases the price of repair, and every day of silence deepens complicity. The warning we face could not be clearer. America is at a crossroads where the path of recklessness leads to decline, and the path of responsibility offers the possibility of renewal. Trump's mistake has illuminated the stakes, stripping away the illusion that the system can absorb endless shocks without consequence. The world is watching, waiting to see whether the United States will acknowledge its error and adjust its course, or whether it will continue down a path of arrogance and isolation. And history, as always, will deliver its judgment.